Chapter 6. When Sir Ambrose and the Duke thus withdrew, Edric and Rosabella were left alone together, and remained for some moments in perfect silence, for both felt keenly the awkwardness of their situation. After standing for some time looking as foolish as their enemies could reasonably desire, Edric bowed, and would have made good his retreat, but Rosabella stopped him. "Let us be friends, Edric," she said, smiling and holding out her hand, "though we were never longer lovers." Edric took the offered hand, and involuntarily pressed it to his lips. "Upon my word, you improve," continued Rosabelle gaily. "I declare I never saw such an instance of gallantry from you before, during the whole course of our courtship." Edric smiled as he replied, "If you knew the burthen that has been taken from my mind by the explanation of this morning." "Hush, hush," cried Rosabella. "Now you have spoiled all it again. I'm afraid your gallantry was too great to be lasting." "I acknowledge," replied Edric, joining in her mirth, "that it is not very polite in me to rejoice being freed from your chains, but I am no flatterer, and "A truce with apologies," exclaimed Rosabella. "As my uncle very justly observed just now, they only make the matter worse. The case is simply this. You and I are not suited for each other. We found it out, and we are both glad to be released from ties that we discovered were incompatible with our happiness. Can anything be more clear, as Dr. Entwerfen says? You, I presume, are going to travel, and to gratify your natural love of variety, and wish to acquire information, whilst I, poor unfortunate damsel that I am, must remain at home and wear the willow, till I am fortunate enough to meet with a swain who has the penetration to discover my charms." "And most ardently do I hope that it may be soon to the case," said Edric, astonished with her affability, and feeling more kindly disposed towards her than he had ever done before. "You are right in supposing I wish to travel, but alas, I have now not the power. Father is too much offended to afford me the means, and without money—" "Traveling is far from agreeable," interrupted Rosabella, smiling. "Is not that what you would say? Why not apply it to Father Morris? Then he can, and I am sure, will help you. For myself, I am powerless except as far as giving advice." "Your advice, however, is excellent," replied Edric, regarding her with still increasing amazement. "And I assure you I will follow it to the letter. I never thought of applying to the Reverend Father, though I now feel it is the best thing I can do." "Why do you look at me so incredulously?" continued Rosabella. "I have no motive of deceiving you, and yet you look suspicious at thought that I have had of you. I own my behavior towards you has changed, but remember the different circumstances in which now I am placed. Formerly I feared even to speak to you, lest my words should be deemed as encouragement of the pretensions I suppose you to entertain my hand. Now that we are both free, that reason no longer exists. Besides, I feel grateful for you declaring your sentiments so openly, and thus saving me from my uncle's displeasure. Can anything be more simple, as your friend Dr. Entwerfen would say?" Notwithstanding Rosabella's apparent openness, however, and the plausible reasons she gave for her conduct, Edric could not divest himself of the idea that she wished to get him out of the kingdom as speedily as possible, for some other motives than she thought proper to avow. There likewise appeared some mystery in her speaking so confidently of the assistance of Father Morris, for as the Duke's family had a regular confessor, Father Murphy, it seemed strange that Rosabella should have an intercourse with any other priest beyond that required by the common forms of society, and so slight an intimacy could scarcely warrant a positive assertion she had made of. Edric, however, was too anxious to avail himself of any opportunity that offered of proceeding to Egypt, to trouble himself with long investigation on the subject, and when he quitted Rosabella, he proceeded to search for Father Morris as a matter of course, and almost without any volition of his own. The suite of rooms appointed to Father Morris in the mansion of Sir Ambrose was in a wing partly detached from the main dwelling, and thither Edric bent his steps. As he approached, however, to his great surprise, he heard the sound of blows, followed by deep groans. Knowing that it was an hour for dinner for the domestics, and that none of the other inmates of the mansion were home but the friar and himself, he could not at first account for the strange, fearful noise, but finding, as he advanced, the sound proceeds from the inner chamber of the priest, where no one but himself ever ventured, but soon became satisfied that Father Morris was performing a penance of self-flagellation, and was so deemed imperious to interrupt the penance. He seated himself quietly in the outer chamber, waiting at the priest's leisure, wondering, however, to himself, what crime so holy a man could possibly have committed that he would require so severe an expiation. When Father Morris made his appearance, it was with his usual downcast eyes and composed look. He expressed his astonishment at seeing Edric, but made no allusion to the penance he had just been performing, and listened with a cold, unmoved aspect to Edric's communication. "Then I am to understand," said he, when he was finished, "that you are like a prince we were reading on the other day in a book we found in your tutor's library. You cannot be happy because you have never been miserable, and you are going to plunge into all cares and troubles of the world, merely to learn how to enjoy retirement." "Not exactly so, father," rejoined Edric. "I have two other motives. The anger of my father, and the earnest tormenting wish I have before confessed to you, of diving into the secrets of the grave." "And how is it that's to be accomplished by your leaving England?" "I wish to resuscitate a mummy." "The scheme is wild, vague, and impractical." "Not if Dr. Entwerfen's hypothesis be true. For supposing that the soul of the ancient Egyptians to be chained to their bodies, and to be remaining in them in the torpid state, it is very possible that by employing the power of an agent of Gallivism, the reanimation may be produced. I've already seen some wonderful instances of vivifying power of the machine, and as the Egyptians took care to preserve the bodies of their dead quite entire, probably from the idea I have just alluded to, I think the mummies are the best subjects we can possibly fix upon our experiments." "The ancient Egyptians had not imagined the souls of their dead remained in their bodies, but that they would return to them after the expiration of a certain number of years, so that your hypothesis, as far as it rests upon their opinions, falls to the ground." "Do not call it my hypothesis," returned Edric. "It is that of Dr. Entwerfen, and my own opinion is decidedly different, for I cannot imagine any idea of death that does not simply imply the separation between the body and soul. The subject, however, is curious to me, to be highly interesting, and I own, candidly, that there are many mysteries connected with it, which it would give me the highest satisfaction to have explained." "And these mysteries which have vainly excited the speculation of the learned since the commencement of the world, you think your journey to Egypt will enable you to unravel," said Father Morris with a sardonic sneer. Edric felt irritated at his manner, and replied warmly, "I'm not presumptuous, father, but even as you must allow, man is often but a blind instrument in the hands of fate. It is possible that the racking desire I feel to explore these mysteries may be an impulse from a superior power, and a proof that I am destined to be a mortal agent of the revelation to man. Egypt is a country rich in monuments and antiquity, but all historians unite in declaring her ancient inhabitants to have possessed knowledge and science far beyond even those boasted improvements of modern times. For instance, we could attempt to erect stupendous buildings like the pyramids, where enormous masses are arranged in geometrical accuracy, and the labors of man have emulated the everlasting durability of nature? Are we even capable of convincing words so majestic that they put those in execution? No, surely not. In every point they surpass us." "Even in their religion?" asked Father Morris sarcastically. "No," returned Eric. Every scheme of religion falls infinitely below the divine perfection of Christianity, but as Christianity was not in the times he was speaking of revealed, it cannot be denied that the Egyptians made some approach to wisdom even in their devotions. They worshipped nature, though they disguised her under the symbols of her attributes, and gratified the vulgar taste by giving them tangible objects to represent ideas too sublime for their unenlightened comprehension. That they entertained the divine idea of a resurrection and of the rewards and punishments of a future life is evident, not only from their favorite fable of the phoenix, and the use they make of how hackneyed image of the butterfly, but by the care they bestowed on the preservation of the body, their mourning for the loss of Osiris, their rejoicings when he was found, and the kind of trial to which they subjected the human corpse after death, when, if serious crimes were alleged and proved against it, it was denied the rights of sepulture, and left to rot unlamented. Then can any modern institutions excel the wisdom of the laws enacted by the pharaohs, or can any modern magnificence equal the displayed in the cities of Memphis or Thebes? And since it will hardly be disputed, what country can be more fitting than that once so highly favored to be the scene of the most important discovery ever made by man? Deride me if you will. I feel a superior power inspires my wishes. I feel irresistibly impelled forward. I feel called upon by the force far superior to my own, and I will obey its dictates. You smile and secretly ridicule my projects, but remember that excessive incredulity sometimes savors as strongly as folly as credulity itself, and that both are alike injurious and the progress of science.
I do not doubt it, said Father Morris with provoking coldness, though it must certainly be allowed not to be prevailed foible of the present day. However, without staying to discuss the point at present, I humbly suggest that, as I have an opportunity to be rather pressed for time, it may be as well to consent to bestow a few minutes' attention upon the best human means of enabling you to fulfill your highest destinies that await you in Egypt. As, notwithstanding the imperious nature of the impulse that invites you there, I presume you are aware that the vulgar agency of money will be necessary, as well as the scientific one of galvanism. The feelings of Edric were too highly wrought to bear this irony, and snatching up his hat, he rushed out of the room, casting a look of indignation at the priest, who vainly endeavored to stop him. Maddened by the conflicting emotions that struggled in his bosom, and disgusted alike with himself, Father Morris, and all the world, Edric hurried on, totally unaware which way he was going, till his career was stopped by the coming suddenly and violently in contact with another person, who was running equally heedlessly with himself, but in an opposite direction. Both recoiled some paces from the shock, and Edric found, to his surprise, it was Adelard, who had been greeted unceremoniously. Curiosity to know what could have occasioned the abstraction of the worthy butler, he being generally remarkable for his peculiar attention to matters of ceremony, diverted the thoughts of Edric from himself, and he, for the moment, forgot his own woes, whilst he inquired into those of Abelard.
"Alas, alas," said the old man, shaking his grey head, whilst the tears streamed in torrents down his wrinkled cheeks, "that I should ever have lived to see this day. Oh, Master Edric, how could you irritate your respectable progenitor? Alas, alas, I feel the lacrymal glands suffused almost to overflowing, whenever the recollection of what has passed shoots across my paimeter." "For heaven's sake, tell me what's the matter."
Oh dear, sobbed the unhappy butler. With such longevity should have been granted me only that I should be so promising a young gentleman turned out of doors.
"Tell me the worst, though, indeed. I now fear I comprehend your meaning all too well."
Sir Ambrose commands that you depart immediately and never again enter the mansion of your paternal ancestors.
"What will become of me?" exclaimed Eric, clasping his hands together and raising his eyes to heaven. Then, after a short pause, he added more composedly, Well, come what will, I am resigned. Fate urges me onward with irresistible violence, and I feel it would be in vain to attempt to combat against her dictates. I, at least, am prepared to execute her will.
But where will you go? Sobbed Adelard. You will want money and friends. Alas, alas, that I should ever see the son of my old master stand in need of pecuniary assistance.
He but repeats the words of Father Morris, said Edric, and yet how differently his doubts affect me. The irony of the priest doves me to despair, but the grief of the old man soothes my wounded spirit. He surely loves me. These words were uttered to a faint key, that the name of Father Morris only caught the ear of Abelard, and he replied,
I don't like Father Morris, and I never did. Although it is now 20 years since he first entered the family, and though I have never seen anything in him essentially peculiar throughout the entire of the long period, yet my aversion remains undiminished. I suppose it must be a natural antipathy that pulls my body doesn't assimilate to the shape and the atoms that emanate from his.
He drove me almost to madness, said Edric.
I am not surprised at that, returned Abelard, for I know he can take a fiend-like pleasure in tormenting. He can employ the most provoking, tantalizing expressions, and yet preserve the same soft, smooth voice and keep his palate half closed, his visual organs fixed upon the ground. Indeed, I never saw the iris of his eyes dilated in my life, and yet then he had such a manner of raising his supercilia, curving his nose, and drawing down his desperate or angrily oris when he listens to anyone or replies to them, as to give an expression of perpetual sneer to his saturnine countenance.
Edric's own recent personal experience bore testimony only too forcibly to the justice of those remarks, and as the wounded man shrinks from the slightest touch, so did Edric find the words of Abelard jar upon his nerves, and turning away from him to hide his emotions, he encountered the earnest gaze of Father Morris himself.
Why do you appear astonished? Said the priest, smiling. You are an infant, Edric. Your quarrel be with your best friends, and then appear surprised that you do not find them capricious as yourself. You will fancy you are very angry with me, for instance, and yet I am conscious of having done anything to offend you. Was it a crime to attempt to moderate an enthusiasm that I feared might mislead you? Was it a fault to warn you against the dangers of the world of which you yet know little? No, no, I am confident your own reason and excellent good sense will acquit me, if you will but suffer them to act. Your imagination is too vivid, Edric. It sweeps away all before it like a torrent. If you would view things calmly, you would perceive your folly. The world will teach you wisdom. Go then, travel, experience personal privations and evils of every description, that you may learn to enjoy the pleasures that even now lie within your grasp, but which you spurn from you with contempt. So true is it that we never learn the real value of any blessing till we've experienced the misery that attends its privation.
If this be the case, replied Edric, soothed in spite of himself by the insinuating manner of the monk, why should my feelings be an exception to the general rule? And since all our pleasures acquire a new zest by the force of contrast, and mine have long since lost all relish, is it not even wisdom to try to effect the change?
And yet it seems a folly, said Father Morris in his smooth, plausible, hypocritical voice, with his eyes again fixed upon the ground, to incur a certain evil in the hope of attaining some certain good.
Edric started, and fixed his eyes upon him, with the expression of a monk well understood, and, not wishing again to provoke him past endurance, he continued in a different tone. But it is useless for age to preach lessons of prudence to youth, and as your father says, every one must purchase his own experience, so we will now, if you please, change the subject to that of making preparations for your journey. You are still determined to visit Egypt, I suppose. It is my most ardent wish.
Return then to your apartment, and by tomorrow all shall be ready for your departure. "He must not enter the house," said Adelard. Alas, that I should live to say it! Sir Ambrose has forbidden him even to cross the threshold.
Remain. Can you not remain concealed in the apartment of Dr. Entwerfen? Asked Father Morris, after a short pause.
No one enters but himself, and one of the windows looks upon the terrace so that you may reach it unobserved. Abelard, on confidence, will not betray you, and I will accompany you, as I wish to consult with a doctor regarding your intended voyage.
Edric hastily assented, and bidding Adelard an affectionate adieu, he and Father Morris easily climbed to the window that led into the atrium of Dr. Edward, whilst Adelard, clasping his hands together, exclaimed as he retired, "God bless him! Well, we shall not want for the pecuniary assistance at any rate. If Mr. Davis and I can help it, that is one comfort." When Edric and Father Morris entered the study of Dr. Entwerfen, they found him engaged in what, certainly considered his age and station, seemed a very extraordinary amusement. He was apparently dancing a hornpipe, drawing his heels together, and alternately rising and sinking like a clown in a pantomime, twisting his face in the meantime into the most hideous grimaces. "What is the matter?" cried Edric and Father Morris, both at the same time, gazing at him in surprise.
I am galvanized,"
cried the doctor in a piteous tone, nodding his head with a sudden jerk that seemed to threaten every instant to throw it out of its socket. And then, suddenly starting, he kicked out one leg horizontally and twirled upon it in the air with the air of an opera dancer. "How did it happen?" cried Edric, excessively shocked at the unnatural constraint exhibited between the doctor's serious countenance and his involuntary antics.
"I can't exactly tell," replied the doctor, bolting forth his hands with difficulty,
and still swimming, grinning, and capering to the inexpressible horror of his companions, till by degrees his grimaces subsided, and he was enabled to stand tolerably steady. He now informed his friends that, trying some experiments with his galvanic battery, he had unfortunately operated upon himself, and in his turn listened to their account of what had passed between Edric and Sir Ambrose. Instead of expressing sorrow, however, when he found his pupil had quarreled with his father, the doctor's eyes sparkled with joy.
"Then you will inevitably travel," he exclaimed. "We shall visit the pyramids, we shall animate the mummies, and we shall attain the immortality."
There was something in his violent expression of a doctor's transports that did not quite harmonize with Edric's feelings, especially as he fancied he perceived the satirical smile lurking round the lips of Father Morris. "When shall you be ready to set off?" he asked abruptly.
"Tomorrow, if you will," replied the doctor. "I have foreseen this result some time, and I have been preparing everything accordingly. I never knew a young Englishman in my life, Father Morris, who was not fond of traveling. The inhabitants of the other countries travel for what they can get, and what they hope to learn, but an Englishman travels because he does not know what to do with himself. He spares neither time, trouble, nor money. He goes everywhere, sees everything, after which he returns, just as wise as when he set out. Not that I blame curiosity. No, I admire it above all things. It is that which has led to all the great discoveries that have been made since the creation of the world, and it is that which now impels us to explore the pyramids."
Edric looked excessively annoyed at the conclusion of his speech, and, to change the subject, hastily asked the doctor if he thought his galvanic battery powerful enough for the experiments they meant to try it with.
"Powerful!" exclaimed the doctor. "Why, I feel it even now tingling in my finger's end. I should think, sir, the effect has been upon me sufficient proof of the force of the machine."
"Undoubtedly," replied Father Morris. "Nay, if we are judged by that, I only tremble lest you should animate the pyramids as well as the mummies, and you should allow it to be an awkward sight to see them, sir, tumbling and slipping along the plain."
"Sir?"
said the doctor, staring at him. "Do you intend visiting any other country other than Egypt?" said Father Morris, fearful he had gone too far, and wishing, for reasons he did not openly avow, not to offend his companions. I should like to see India, said the doctor. Some black-letter pamphlets in my possession allude to its once being governed by an old woman, and as regular historians make no mention of the fact, I should like to see what traditions I could gather respecting it on the spot. The religion of the ancient Hindus, before they converted to Christianity, has been said to resemble that of the ancient Egyptians. By comparing the monuments of both, one might be made to illustrate the other. I should also like, before we quit Africa, to see the celebrated court of Timbuktu. I have long been in correspondence with a learned pundit there, and who has communicated to me some of the most sublime discoveries. The whole of the interior of Africa must be interesting, observed Father Morris, particularly the rising states of the banks of the Niger. It is generally instructive as well as amusing to watch the birth and struggles of infant republics, and to remark first how fast people encroach, and then their governors. Whilst the rulers are weak, they are always liberal, and their exalted sentiments and the general disgrace of extracted portions as they become powerful. In short, said the doctor, I would willingly traverse the whole world, but I know one country that I should disdain to visit. And which is that? Asked Eric. America, replied the doctor. I have no wish to have my threat coat on my breath stopped by a bowstring. I have a perfect horror of despotic governments. Then how do you endure the one we live under? Asked Father Morse. Oh, the case is quite different, returned the doctor. With us, the spur of despotism is scarcely felt, and the people, being permitted occasionally to think and act for themselves, are not debased and brutalized by the slaves of absolute power in general. Despotism, with us, is like a rod which the schoolmaster keeps hung in sight of the boys, but which he has seldom any occasion to make use of. For the despotism of the Americans, however, oh, heaven defend us! Amen, said Eric. For as we are happy now, we should be idiots to desire change. What an unphilosophical sentiment, exclaimed the doctor. I'm really quite shocked at you, Edric, should utter such a speech. What an abominable doctrine! Remember that if you once allow innovation to be dangerous, you instantly put a stop to all improvements. You absolutely shut and bolt your doors against it. Oh, it is horrible that such a doctrine should be broached in a civilized country. You could not surely be aware of what you are saying. Tomorrow, said Father Morris, addressing Eric, and without noticing the indignation of the learned doctor, you must proceed to town, where you will remain at the house of a friend of mine, till you are ready for your voyage to Egypt. I would not, however, advise you to stay long before you go there, for as your father intends visiting London in a day or two, you might meet, and the consequences may be unpleasant. I've already dispatched a carrier pigeon to advise my friend Lord Gustavus de Montfort of your arrival. He, I am sure, will give you a hearty welcome, and not only afford you the shelter of his house, but afford you all the assistance in his power, to enable you to make preparations for your journey, for which purpose also I will take care to supply you with money. No thanks, continued he, stopping Edric, who was about to speak. I detest them. If you really feel obliged to me, you will prove it by remaining silent. I must leave you now, as my absence might create suspicion. Adieu. God bless you. A balloon will wait for you tomorrow morning at the corner of the wood. The doctor will, of course, accompany you. I think you may safely rest here concealed till then. Once more, adieu. Now Father Morris is gone, said Dr. Entwerfen to his people. I have a treat for you. I will show you a curious collection of ballads, all of which are at least 300 years old, which a friend of mine picked up in London for me the other day, and sent me down to this morning by a stage balloon. They're all genuine rag paper, a certain proof of their antiquity, for you know the asbestos paper we use now has not been invented for more than 200 years. But you shall see them. Follow me. So saying, the doctor trotted off to his library, that paradise of half-forgotten volumes, most of which have been accidentally saved from their well-merited destination of covering over butter and wrapping up cheese to be drawn from dust and obscurity which they had lain for centuries to ornament the shelves of Dr. Erdworth, and whose authors, if they would have been taken a peep upon the earth and beheld them, would have been quite astonished to find themselves immortal. Entering this emporium of neglected learning, the doctor hastily advanced to a table on which lay his newly acquired treasures. Holding them up, he exclaimed, "Look, Edric, how beautiful dirty paper is! And no art could counterfeit this dingy hue. The sooty tinge is a genuine tint of antiquity. You know, Edric, in ancient times, the color employed the culinary purposes, and indeed all the common usages of life was produced for the composition of wood, and is a black bituminous substance, amphitrite drawn from the bowels of the earth called coal, of which you may yet see specimens in the cabinets of the curious. But these circumstances decomposed, or rather expanded, by the force of heat, and the attraction of cohesion was dissolved, and the component parts flew off in the shape of smoke or soot. This smoke, rising into the air, has dispersed it, and a few minute particles of atoms of which it is composed, falling and resting upon everything that chanced to be in their way, produce that incomparable husky hue, which the moderns have tried so often, though in vain, to imitate. I beg your pardon, Eric, for using such vulgar language to express what I wish to say, but really, treating upon this subject, I did not know how to explain myself elegantly." "Oh, what sounded you quite well, sir. After all, it is only true that the language is to convey the ideas of one person to the understanding of another, and provided that end to be attained, I really do not see what is any consequence what words you make use of." "True, Edric, dear. You make a very just observation sometimes. Well, but the ballads I'm going to show you are treasures, my jewels, as the Roman ladies said to her children. Look at what specimens they are, a little torn here and there, with a few lines illegible, by genuine antiques. I warranty every one of them is 300 years old. Look, it is real linen paper. You may tell it by the texture, and then by the spelling. See that number of letters they put into the words that were of no use. Look at the titles of them. Here is Tragedy End of Poor Miss Bailey, and here Cherry Ripe, and It's Been Roaming. Here's Loves of Captain Walter and Miss Rowe, and here's Jessie the Flower of Dumbling, and Dunros the Brave. But this is my phoenix. Will be the envy of collectors. Here is my invaluable treasure. This, I believe, is absolutely unique, that I am so blessed to possess the only copy existent. The date is wanting, but the manners it describes are so unpolished that I should think that it might be traced back to the time of the aboriginal Britons. Thus it begins. At Wednesbury there was a cocking, a match between Newton and Scoggins. The nailers and colliers left work, and the spittles they went jogging. Told the Rollo. I used to be very puzzled at this rhythm, which is one of the frequent recurrence in ancient songs. At first I thought it was a relic of some language now irrevocably lost. Then it struck me it might be an invocation to the deities of the Aborigines. In short, I was quite perplexed and knew not what to think, when a learned friend of mine hit upon an idea the other day which seems completely to solve the difficulty. He suggested it was an ancient manner of running up and down the scale, and that the Toll de Ro Lo had the same significance of Do Re Mi So Fa, which solution is at once so simple and ingenious that I am sure you, as well as myself, must be struck by it. I here omit a few stanzas in which the author enumerates his heroes exactly in the Homeric manner. The names are so barbarous that I am afraid of loosening my teeth in pronouncing them. There was a plenty of beef at the dinner, of a bull that was baited to death. Bunny Hyde, which had to have stopped his breath. What beautiful simplicity there is in that last line, which had to have stopped his breath. Oh, we moderns have nothing equal to it. The company fell in confusion to see this poor bunny hide choke, so they hurried him down to the kitchen and held his head over the smoke. This develops a curious practice of antiquity, you know, Edric. I explained to you just now the manner of combustion was formerly effected, and it causes the production of what was called smoke. I own, however, it seems a strange way of reviving a half-suffocated man to hold his head over the smoke, which, being loaded, as I've said before, was innumerable atoms of all sizes and shapes, which one would think would be likely to impede respiration rather than to restore it. In fact, however, it is undoubted. It is not only the afforded curious illustration of the manner of the ancients, but it is itself strong proof of the authenticity of the ballad, for such an idea never would have entered the head of a modern, till reported to Pure Hyde. One gave him a kick in the stomach, the other a thump in the brow. His wife cried, "Throw him in the stable, and he will be better just now." This unfeeling conduct of his wife does not say much in the condemnation of ladies of those times. Here follows a hiatus of several stanzas. I find, however, by a word or two here and there, that they celebrated the exploits of two Gallic heroes. The best was the country bred. There was a brassy black. Yeah, having trouble saying this one. The best was the country bred. The one was brassy wing black, the other was dusky wing red. These unfortunate victims of the cruelty of man seem both to have perished. There is a stanza, however, before this catastrophe, which seems to relate to the combat. The conflict was hard upon each, till glossy wing black was choked. The colliers were naturally vexed, and the nailers were all provoked. This passage seems very obscure. Naturally is evidently a sign of comparison, but I cannot say I ever saw it employed before. It is, however, another proof of the amazing antiquity of the ballad. After this, it appears that the people broke upon the ring, and both cocks were crushed to atoms. I don't know whether you are acquainted with the manner these Gallic combats were conducted, Edric. A kind of amphitheater was formed, which birds were pitted one against another, whence it was called a cockpit. Combatants were armed with large iron spurs, and the victor generally left his rival dead upon the field. The ballad follows. The cockpit was near the church, as an ornament to the town. On one side was an old coal pit, and the other was well-coursed ground. Course is a kind of hearth or furze. Peter Hadley peeped through the gate, in order to see the cockfights. Spittle jobbed his eye out with a fork, and said, "Bless you, it stars you right." This is very spirited and expressive, though the false quantities render it difficult to read. Some folks may think it storage, who Winsbury never knew, but those who have never been there wouldn't have least doubted it true. For they all were savage by nature, and guilty of deeds that are shocking. Jack Baker he'd whack his own father, and so ended Winsbury cocking. "It's very fun, certainly," said Edric, who was half asleep. "Upon my word," replied the doctor, "I don't think you have heard a single word I've been saying." "Oh, yes, I have," replied Edric. "Every syllable. It was about a man killing his own father and putting his eye out with a fork." "Eh?" replied the doctor, somewhat annoyed at the unequivocal proof that his words might have stuck upon the angular organs of the pupil, had they not reached the brain. The exclamation of the doctor restored Edric to his senses, and he began to apologize. "I'm really very sorry," he said, "but you must excuse my inattention. Sometimes, you know, my mind is not in tune for literary discussions, even when proceeding from the most eloquent lips. This is my case at the present moment. My mind is so occupied by the important change that has just taken place in my affairs that I own, even your learning and eloquence were thrown away upon me." "If that be your state of mind," replied the doctor with chagrin, "it is of no use to show you any more of my literary treasures. I also have some matchless excellence. Here is a letter addressed to Sheridan, a witty writer of comedies in the 18th century, which was never opened. And here's a tailor's bill of the immortal Byron, which may be possibly never been looked at. But here is the most inestimable of my relics. Look at least at this. This piece of paper, covered carelessly with irregular strokes and lines, was once in the possession of an enchanting, that inimitable novelist of the 19th century, who's generally distinguished in the works of contemporary writers by the mysterious title, The Great Unknown. See, here is half the word Waverley written upon it, and doubtless all the other irregular marks and scratches proceeded directly from his pen. I confess, Edric, I never contemplate this relic of genius without feeling reverence and almost awe. Perhaps, say I to myself, when I look at it, when these letters were formed, the first idea had just been arisen to the mind of the author of those immortal words, which were afterwards destined to improve and delight mankind. Perhaps at the very moment gigantic thoughts were rushing through his brain, and a variety of new ideas opening their treasures imagination. Oh, here is something the mere random stroke of a pen of a celebrated character, inexpressibly affecting to the mind. It carries one back to the very time he lived. It seems to be one antiquated with him, and to let into the secrets of his inmost thoughts. But I see you're not attending to me, Eric. I'm very sorry. Another time I should be happy, but now I cannot. However, when we return, perhaps... It may be too late, then, said the doctor solemnly, locking up his cabinet. He led the way back to the common sitting room in his high dungeon.